Dear friends, dear colleagues, it's an enormous pleasure to have the opportunity to address your conference today. Thank you so much for inviting me, and my only regret is that I can't be here in person. I've called my presentation today International Managers and Their Discontents. Most of my work is in Paris at the moment, and I work a lot with international managers in transnational corporations. And yes, they do have discontents, and I'll discuss those in just a minute. My presentation will last about 15 minutes, and what I want to do is three things. Number one, discuss why international managers face problems and explain what those problems are. Number two, offer a model to business language teachers that you can use with your students. And three, apply this model to the teaching of presentation skills in an international environment. My belief is that if we can teach these skills to university and to college students even before they enter the world of work, then they'll be much more competent and much more confident when they enter the international arena. And if you're training in companies, then hopefully you can turn discontented international managers into contented international managers. At least that's the aim. So let's get started. My first point is, why are international managers discontented? In my experience, there are three reasons: English language, remote communication, and remote reporting lines. Let me explain. First, English. Many companies I deal with have one of two policies. One, if there's a single non-native speaker of French in the room, the meeting takes place in English. So let's call this the English when foreigners are around policy. This policy places the French managers at an immediate disadvantage. This is not because their English isn't good. It's because they find it difficult to understand the speed, the accent, the idioms, the nuances of speech that many other nationalities use when they're speaking English. The second area of English is when the whole company works in English, both internally and externally. Let's call this the English-only policy. This policy poses enormous problems because two speakers of the same language are being asked to communicate in English, even though it's not their mother tongue. I mean, what would you do given the choice? Talk to Russians in Russian or in English? Well, Russian, obviously. Communication comes first. An all-English or an English-only policy, or an English where foreigners are around policy, makes sense in principle, but it imposes enormous problems in practice. It also creates uncertainty and lack of confidence among many managers. However, that's not all. The second discontent is remote communication. The economic recession is imposing travel restrictions. So communication is no longer face-to-face, but virtual, via telephone and video conference calls. Now this means I'm working in a foreign language with overseas managers whose markets I don't know and who I never meet. They could be based in New Delhi, or Mexico City, or Rio de Janeiro, or even Moscow. So let's take it a stage further. Reporting lines. This manager, based in another country, is my line manager. I'm reporting to him or her, and they are responsible for appraising my performance and agreeing my bonus at year end, and I never even meet them. So how can they know what I'm like, how good I am, how hard I work? The problem for us as teachers of English or any other language is how can we help our students as future managers feel confident and competent in international presentations and meetings in English? And it seems to me that teaching English is not enough. What's needed is some kind of structure to help organize thought and phrases that you can use with it. And that leads me to my second point. communication models. And the one that I use is called the communication triangle. And here it is. The communication triangle has 3 points. The first is concise. Keep it short, keep it sharp, and keep it sweet. And I'll explain that in more detail in a minute. The second is frameworks. If our students understand the structure of communication and use it, then they'll find it much easier to organize and to communicate their thinking. The third is stock phrases. Now, these are the common everyday phrases that everyone uses. They don't even think about them until you get them wrong. And then they think, what kind of strange person is this? So my point is this. If you can master these 3 skills, be concise, use a framework, and use the appropriate stock phrases to go with it, then it frees you to concentrate on your own content, what you want to say. And in doing so, you become a more efficient international communicator. So, our next step is to apply the communication triangle. At the top, you can see concise, short, sharp, and sweet. What does that mean? Well, this shows the 3 elements of being concise. Keep it short, keep it sharp, keep it sweet. First, short. To be short, use KISS. That's an acronym. It means keep it short and simple. Or as the Americans say, keep it simple, stupid. What it means is this. Try and use 1 thought per sentence. And try and keep your sentences between 15 and 25 words. Next, sharp. To keep it sharp, keep to the point. Be clear, don't digress. Remember, a message isn't delivered until it's understood. Third, sweet. To keep it sweet, be polite. Remember, if you're only going to communicate by conference call, why make enemies of people you haven't even met? Many French people tend to explain too much. And to be honest, so do a lot of other nationalities. If you can teach your students to keep their explanations short, sharp, and sweet, then their audience will understand better and they'll get a much better reaction. Okay, so now let's go to our second point, frameworks. A framework is a structure. If you have a structure, it helps you organize your thoughts. If you use a structure, it leaves you free to concentrate on your content. I've noticed that the French managers who use these structures, these frameworks, get a much clearer and much better result when they're working internationally. They also get a better result when they work in French. There are frameworks we can use for all the main areas of communication, presentations, meetings, negotiations, and networking. And in a minute, I'll show you how to use the framework for presentations. Now, the final point down there on the right is stock phrases. These are the everyday phrases native speakers use in communication. And in a minute, we'll show you some of these as well. So, that's our communication triangle. And that's my second point. Be concise, use frameworks and stock phrases. And use them in presentations, meetings, negotiations, and networking. So, now let me move to my third point, how to apply the communication triangle to the teaching of presentations. And we can start with this gentleman. Know who he is? Sir Winston Churchill. And apart from being British Prime Minister in the Great Patriotic War, he was a great speaker and presenter in the British Parliament. And one day, a young parliamentarian went up to Mr. Churchill and asked him, "Mr. Churchill, how do I make my first speech?" And Churchill replied, "Simple, dear boy. Tell them what you're going to say, tell them you're saying it, and tell them you've said it." And that's our framework for presentations. I call it the 3S structure. And here, S means 3 stages. And here they are. S1, signpost. Tell them what you're going to say. S2, signal. Tell them you're saying it. And S3, summarize. Tell them you've said it. So let's look at each stage in more detail. Here's S1, Signpost. You can see the signpost on the right. This gives you a roadmap, and it has 4 stages and appropriate stock phrases to go with it. You can think of others, but these will work. So first, the title of your talk. For example, I'm going to talk about presentations. Next, duration. My talk will last about 15 minutes. By the way, giving the duration helps your audience to program their concentration. After that, key points. For example, I'm going to make 3 main points. 1, signposting. 2, signaling. 3, summarizing. And finally, questions. Now, there are 2 ways of doing this. 1, questions during the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. And the second, questions at the end of the presentation. For example, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. Until then, please keep quiet. That's my S1 stage. That's my S1 stage, signpost. The roadmap, if you like. Easy to use, and you can see how the stock phrases we've introduced fit the framework. So now let's go on to stage 2, signal. Stage 2, signal, is a way of telling your audience where you are in your presentation, which key point you're focusing on. It's very useful because quite often in a presentation, people lose track of where you are. So you use these signals, if you like, as milestones along the way. They tell you how far you are going and how far you've still got to go. It's very simple to do, except for one small thing, which is the transition between your points. Transition is a summary in 2 or 3 words of what you've just said. Certainly no more than 1 sentence. So, for example, that's point 2, signal and summarize. Now, once again, you can see the stock phrases that I use to illustrate each point and to tell my audience that I've finished that point and I'm moving on to the next one. Now, let's move on to stage 3 of our 3S structure, the summary. And this, once again, has 4 stages, and they are summarize, conclude, invite questions, and thank. And you can see the stock phrases alongside each step. When you summarize, don't just state the points you've made. State the transitions, the single summary sentences. They remind the audience of what you've said. When you conclude, you say why the points you've made are important. Okay, so for example, the reason why I believe this is so important is that if you use a clear framework and stock phrases, everyone understands your presentation and it'll be much clearer and you will be much more confident. Okay, that's an example of a conclusion. Finally, you can invite questions. For example, that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be delighted to answer them. Oh, and one more thing. Say thank you. Saying thank you isn't just being polite. It's a way of telling the audience that you've finished. I'm sure you've heard people finish a presentation like this. If you have any questions, I'll be delighted to try and answer them. And you've no idea if they're going to say anything else or not. So really what they need to do is say thank you. That way you know they've finished. So just to conclude, here is how a stage 3 summary might sound. To sum up, in my presentation today, I've made 3 points. I've explained the problems that international managers experience. I've introduced the communication triangle, concise, frameworks, and stock phrases. And I've demonstrated how one framework, the 3S structure for presentations, can help you create simpler, clearer presentations. The 3S structure, just to remind you, contains those 3 stages: signpost, the roadmap, that's it, signal, tells you where you are, and summary. And I've also suggested stock phrases that you can use with each stage. In conclusion, the reason why this is so important is that research shows that people only remember the first and last parts of a presentation. So the signposting and the summary stages are very important. Using this structure, I find, makes it much easier to plan and deliver a presentation in English or indeed another language with confidence. And many French managers, as I said, now use it with great success, both in English internationally and in French at home. So who knows? Maybe we can retitle this presentation. Instead of international managers and their discontents, we can say this: the contented international manager. Now, if you want to follow up on these techniques, my book, Key Business Skills, published by HarperCollins, has got frameworks and exercises on presentations, meetings, negotiations, and networking. And you can download the talk and the video from my website, www.culture-training.com. So, that's the end of my presentation. It's been a great pleasure being with you virtually today, and I hope it was useful. And with luck, I'm hoping that we can meet face-to-face in London or in Moscow in the next year. But until then, have a wonderful conference, and thank you very much.